Hello and welcome back to the chicken pen. This is Frankie and today we're going to be talking about caring for your chickens in the hot summer months and keeping them cool. So join me and Frankie. Hi, my name's Fiona. Now Frankie here is actually finding today quite hot. You'll notice that she's panting. Now dogs do that to keep themselves cool because they don't have sweat glands, and chickens are exactly the same. There are some methods to help your chickens keep cool in these hot summer months. So I'm going to take you through those and let's get started. So what are the dangers of a chicken overheating? Well, it can mean that they go into premature moult. Clearly overheating is uncomfortable for the chicken, but moulting is a process which should happen in autumn, ready for the winter period. And what happens then is all of their old feathers, which can't keep them really particularly warm or even dry because they're not waterproof anymore, fall out and they grow new ones. Stressful situations such as overheating can cause that process to happen prematurely. Now Frankie has just come out of a brood period where she's raised new chicks, and this also places a lot of strain on a chicken's body. So she has had a partial moult, and here you can see a patch of darker feathers just below her tail, and those are brand new feathers because that whole section has moulted. So I'm going to let her go now and go back to the flock. Off you go, love. Go on. Good girl. This is Barbie, who's gone through a brood stress moult just like Frankie, and you can see she's still here with her chicks. It's easier to see in this bit of film what that impact is. On her back she's got two very distinct colours of feathers. The lighter colour feathers are the older ones, they're sun bleached. And below her tail she has this wonderful patch of dark ginger feathers. Those are brand new and have just grown. The difference between a brood stress moult and a heat stress moult is that those new feathers may not grow immediately. That means that the chicken could end up with bald patches. In hot summers, not only will chickens be overheated and uncomfortable, but it's possible that those bald patches could lead to sunburn, which is both painful and uncomfortable. So the best thing to do is try and avoid a heat stress moult in the first place. So let's have a look at some tips to avoid that happening. Shade is one of the most important things to provide your chickens in the hot summer months, somewhere they can get out of that hot beating sun. We keep our chickens in our orchard, so we have the advantage of these mature canopies of the fruit trees. This is one of our mature cherry trees, and I think you can see behind me we've got a number of our chickens who are gravitating to this area just to have a snooze and cool down a little bit. There are various different things you can do to give shade to your chickens. There is natural shade like these trees, but if you have tall shrubbery or even a hedge which gives a shady area during the day, that will do the job. But let me show you some of the other varieties. Purpose-built shelters may be the answer to your shade problem. Here are two of ours. They're very simple. They're just three-sided boxes with a roof on top, and they give ample shade. If I zoom in, you should be able to see some of Barbie's chicks getting out of that hot midday sun and just having a little bit of a relax. This year we've hatched a new breed of chicken. These are Old English pheasant fowl. Normally we'd hatch all of our new chickens under a broody hen, but unfortunately the broody we'd selected broke in week 2, so we had to finish the hatching process in an incubator. Now, at the moment they're in their own coop with a run, but they are in the chicken enclosure. They don't have a broody hen to protect them, so they're too small to cope with the adult hens, but this gives them a gradual introduction. They are in the shade of a tree at the moment, but because they have a coop and a run, it gives me a great opportunity to show you how to make some simple shade if your chickens are in the same situation. So If you have an old towel, it needs to be something a little bit heavier, and then you can just pop it over one end of the run, and that creates an area of shade underneath. Now if the wind gets up, you will need to tie this down in some way and secure it, because the flapping motion of the fabric will scare the chickens. But this is a very simple and effective solution if you have a coop and a run. Having access to a plentiful supply of cool drinking water on hot summer's days is important to the chickens. They do drink an awful lot more when it's very, very sunny. I have a number of these drinkers dotted around the enclosure, but even so, I'm checking them twice a day at the moment to make sure that the chickens never run out. There are two things I do to make sure that the drinkers are cool. Now I've opted for these galvanised drinkers, and that's because they last a lot longer than the plastic drinkers. Those do degrade over time in sunlight, but they do have a couple of advantages. The first one to consider is that you can see the level of water on the plastic drinkers without opening them up. And the second is they do keep the water cooler. These metal ones do seem to absorb the heat of the sun, which heats the water up. So the first thing I do to keep the water cool is to keep them under the shade of a tree. And that means it's cooler. But the second thing I do is another little trick. So let me show you that one. This is our freezer, and in the summer months I have a dedicated ice drawer. I really do like this model of freezer because it's got this very handy tray which sits on top of the drawer, and it can be filled with ice cubes. Now the ice cubes can be used for us for drinks, but it's also used for the chickens. I can put those ice cubes directly into the drinkers, or I can use them to quickly make these giant ice cubes below. And those are easily made by putting some of the smaller ice cubes in these plastic bowls, as you can see them there, pour some water on top, and very quickly I get a very, very large ice cube which can go into the drinker, which takes a long time to melt. It's a much, much more effective way of keeping the water cooler for longer. You might notice that in the drawer there's also a 2 litre pop bottle which has been frozen, and I've got 2 uses for those, but we'll get onto those in a little while. This is one of the drinkers in another part of the chicken enclosure, so all I'm going to do is make sure that it's full of fresh cold water, and I've emptied it out and given it a bit of a scrub and filled it up with fresh water. And then I'm going to take my giant ice cube and just pop it in. Now that should keep this water colder for just a little bit longer, and the chickens do seem to enjoy it. Pop the lid back on, and there we have it, cold water for all of those chicks. If making the giant ice cubes doesn't work for you, it might be that the right container isn't to hand, or your drinkers are a little bit smaller, like these that we give to the Old English pheasant fowl. There is a much simpler solution. All I do with these drinkers is fill them with water, and then I have a number of ice cubes here that I brought out in this old yoghurt pot. Just pour the ice in, pop the lid on, and there we go, fresh, cool water for our chickens. We've opted to feed our chickens using a treadle feeder. Now it has fantastic advantages. The first is that it cuts down on a massive amount of wastage from wild birds, but it also reduces the risks of rodents because it requires an adult hen to step on this treadle plate to open the lid to access the food. So it's carefully weighted to those adults. Now in the summer months there is one disadvantage, because hot sun on this metal foot plate can mean that this heats up, and you don't want the chickens being in pain from their foot being burned. It's very much like dogs walking on hot pavements and burning the pads on the soles of their feet. So I do a simple thing. Do regularly get packages with these polystyrene sheets as lining, and these make fantastic lightweight bits of insulation for the treadle. So the first thing I do is actually mark out the right size, break it off, and that gives me the right treadle plate size. Use an old tea towel because chickens aren't very bright and sometimes they can actually eat this polystyrene. Pop it over the plate, and then the next thing I do is just make sure that the whole thing is securely tied in place. And that just means winding a piece of string round and round. Oh, have to move position. The excess off, and there you have it. No risk of bird feet, and there's no weight really added to the treadle, which means that still rodents can't get in and wild birds can't get in. And here's Lightning, one of our copper black Morans, who's happy to model that new and improved treadle. Her feet should now be protected and they should have no issue with accessing the food. It's not just during the day that your chickens can overheat. They can overheat at night. When they're going to roost, they're going into generally a closed coop. And there needs to be adequate air ventilation so that cool air from the night can come in and make sure that it's always fresh and it's not superheated inside. We have these sliding ventilation slots, and in summer we make sure they're as open as possible to make sure it doesn't superheat inside. If it does, your chickens are going to want to roost outside as much as possible on subsequent nights. They're going to roost on top of the coop or in trees or just outside on the ground. There are a couple of other things you can do. The first is to keep the coop door open all during the day so that air is flowing through and circulating. But there is another trick, and let me show you that one. And this is where those frozen 2-litre pop bottles come in handy. They work like inverse hot water bottles. As they absorb the heat from the coop, the ice is melted very, very slowly. I tend to wrap them either in an old towel or an old sheet, and the reason for that is that the chickens then don't get a shock when they lean against it at night. But it also means that it takes a little bit longer for the ice to melt, which keeps the coop cooler for a little bit longer. I put the wrapped pop bottle into the coop just before roosting time. So there we are, the coop is ready for the chickens to come in. We do have excess eggs from the chickens, and this is where we sell them outside the front of our property. We have a chalkboard and a box that the eggs are in, and people pay us on an honesty basis by putting their money in this little money box. Now on days like today, keeping those eggs cool and fresh for customers can be a problem. And this is where those 2-litre bottles of frozen water can come in handy all over again. So let me show you how that works. Let's have a look inside that egg box. On the inside you can easily see the frozen 2-litre pop bottle. Now the only problem is it does generate quite a bit of condensation, and the egg boxes are cardboard, so I've separated the two using these old stone tiles. I've also sat the cardboard egg boxes on some more old stone tiles so the underneath doesn't get wet and degrade. This is a really simple and effective way of keeping our eggs cold for our customers. I hope you found that useful. If you've liked this content, take a moment to give me a thumbs up below. If you're not already a subscriber, take a second to do that and hit the notifications icon, and you'll get to know of any new videos as soon as they become available. If If you've got any questions, leave them in the comments section and I'll do my best to answer them as soon as possible. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.